In this video, I'm going to show you how to stream to the ATEM Television Studio HD8 ISO from a Blackmagic Studio Camera, an ATEM Mini, and a web presenter. Hi, I'm Aaron Parecki. So I've got this Television Studio HD8 ISO here on loan from Blackmagic to take a look at and play around with a little bit. One of my favorite features about it is the built-in streaming bridges. Each of the 8 inputs can be changed between either an SDI input or receiving a remote stream. This means you can actually use it for entirely remote workflows or a combination of some local cameras and some remote cameras. In Blackmagic's announcement, they often talked about the capabilities of using a Blackmagic Studio Camera or URSA camera with the streaming functionality, but you can actually also stream to it from an ATEM Mini or a web presenter. So let's go through the step-by-step tutorial on how to stream from each of these devices into the ATEM. The first thing you'll want to do is get the ATEM software control connected to the Television Studio HD8. That could be either over the network or because you've plugged it in over USB. Once you're connected, you'll get your 8 cameras over here and you'll see your normal palette of tools over here. Down in the bottom left corner is a settings icon. Let's go ahead and open that up. This is where you would normally configure the different input options to give your cameras labels. But notice how these are actually a drop-down menu, although it's grayed out right now. That's because I have no remote streams set up yet. So let's go ahead and click Remote Source Setup. This is where it will tell you your worldwide IP address. You will need to configure port forwarding to forward this port to the ATEM if you're doing this over the internet. And now you can add remote cameras here. If I add remote camera, it's going to go ahead and generate a stream key and give it a source name. We can call this guest 1 or whatever else you want it to call it. Let's go ahead and click done. And now all of these have changed to drop downs where you can change between SDI or this remote key. Let's make a couple more here just for fun. And now I can go ahead and actually change what these inputs are. So let's take a look at my multi-view. In the ATEM right now, I've got 5 local cameras configured. I've got the camera you're seeing me on. I've got an overhead camera of my desk here. I've got a camera pointed at the actual remote studio camera. I've got my computer interface and an iPad. And I've got 3 slots left where I don't have any cameras plugged in locally. So over in the software control, let's change cameras 6, 7, and 8 to these 3 remote guests. I'm just going to choose these from the drop-downs. Now, right now, you're not going to see anything different in the multi-view. We still have 3 empty squares because I haven't actually been pushing video to those yet. So now let's go ahead and set up these different devices to stream to these 3 locations. So back in the remote source setup, there's this little button here with a little arrow. This will actually export this as an XML file, which you can bring into the camera or other devices. If I click on this, it's going to give me a file called guest1 or whatever you've named your input. So let's go ahead and download this one and do the same for guest 2 and guest 3. Now, what Blackmagic says you should be able to do is just take that XML file, put it onto a drive, and load it into your camera. I do want to mention that you can actually make this a little bit easier for yourself in the future if you go ahead and modify the settings that are inside that XML file. So here I've gone and opened up the XML file in a text editor, not Microsoft Word. It has to be an actual text editor. If you look at what's in this, it should be pretty familiar if you've ever seen the streaming configurations in any other tools like the web presenter or the ATEM Mini. One thing I've noticed though is that it's always going to give it the name of your ATEM here. And it's actually a little bit easier to manage if you name it instead based on the stream keys that you've generated. So I'm actually going to call this ATEM HD8 Guest 1. And it does have the stream key built into it, and it's got my RTMP address from the internet as well. I'm going to save that, and I'll do the same thing with Guest 2. I'm going to call this ATEM HD8 Guest 2 and ATEM HD8 Guest 3. So now I've got the 3 XML files ready, and I can load them into the 3 different devices we're going to try with. First, let's try loading this into the Blackmagic Studio Camera. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste this guest1 XML file into a USB drive connected to the computer. I'll eject that, and I'm going to plug that USB drive into the camera. So first, tap the little icon in the corner, go to Setup, scroll over until you see this streaming section, and go one more over, and it'll give you a button that says Load Import Settings. Tap Load Import Settings, choose your USB drive, and go ahead and load the settings from there. Now back on the streaming platform page, you can see that it's got ATEM HD8 Guest 1 selected. And now if I tap on, it's going to go ahead and start streaming to the ATEM. In this demo, I actually have the camera connected via USB to my phone, and it's streaming over my phone's internet connection. And now if we take a look at the multi-view, we can see that camera 6 is actually now receiving the remote feed from the camera. At this point, I might want to actually go into the software control and rename my sources so that I'm not getting confused. Let's call this guest 1, guest 2, and guest 3. And if we look at the multi-view now, we can see guest 1 down there is actually showing the camera feed. The nice thing about streaming directly from the camera into the ATEM is that the tally light works just like you would expect. The tally light is actually now active and will change between green and red depending on whether the camera is in preview or on the air selected in the ATEM itself. That tally information is actually being sent over the internet back up through the streaming connection that the camera has to the switcher. So let's now go ahead and do the same thing, but this time in the web presenter. For this, I'm gonna go ahead and open the web presenter setup app and click on the configuration here. This is where I can choose the load streaming settings and give it the XML file I created earlier. I'm gonna give this one guest 2. Now we should see in this an ATEM HD8 guest 2. Again, this is why I like to label these different from just the name of the switcher. If I choose that, you see it loads the streaming key. And let's go ahead and just turn this on air. Let's take a look at the multi-view, and you can see that in guest 2, we have my camera feed from my main camera here streaming into the ATEM as well. Now you will notice it's on a bit of a delay, and that's because the stream from the web presenter is again going over the internet into the ATEM, and there is a bit of a delay compared to the real-time camera you're seeing in camera 1. If we look at the web presenter status, you can see it's on air streaming to the ATEM guest 2. Now on the web presenter, there is no tally information. So there is no tally indicator on the web presenter itself or in its admin page. However, if you connect a Blackmagic camera to the web presenter, it will feed the tally information back to that camera. Okay, lastly, let's do the same thing, but this time with an ATEM Mini. This will work with any ATEM Mini model that has a streaming feature built in. I'll do this demo on the ATEM SDI Pro ISO. This software control is connected to the ATEM SDI ISO. Let's go ahead and go to the Stream tab and click Load Streaming Settings. I'm going to give it guest 3 and go ahead and open that. What that does is over in the Output tab under Live Stream, now there's a new option under Platforms called ATEM HD8 Guest 3. That pre-fills the streaming key and the quality just like we had in the XML config. Let's go ahead and click on air and then take a look at the multi-view. Now the ATEM is actually streaming the overhead camera from my desk here. And again, you can see it's a little bit delayed compared to the real-time version of the desk in the camera 2 slot. If I switch the ATEM to camera 3, which will be the same camera that I'm streaming and recording this with, you can see it's now, we've got 2 copies of that camera in guest 2 and guest 3, and they're actually pretty much in sync with each other. One's from the web presenter and one's from the ATEM SDI Pro ISO. So those are the steps to stream from any of these 3 devices into the ATEM HD8. One last note I want to mention is a little bit about port forwarding and IP addresses. If you're streaming across the internet from any of these devices into your studio, you will need to configure port forwarding in your router to route that port into the ATEM HD8. How you configure port forwarding will depend on what router it is, so I can't give you a step-by-step guide. But what you're looking for is to go into the settings here, go to the remote source setup, and take a look at what port it says here. That's the port that you'll want to forward from your router into your ATEM's IP address. To find your ATEM's IP address, you can open the ATEM Setup app, click on this little button here, and it should show you the IP address down here. If it's using DHCP, it'll be just a random IP from your router, or you could give it a static IP on your network. So you'll make a port forwarding rule in your router from port 1935 into this IP address. Now, if you don't need to stream over the internet, if you're just trying to do it within a network within a building, then there's actually one more change you'll want to make to that XML file. Remember how in the XML file, it had the RTMP address and it's got your public IP address here. If instead you want to stream over the network, the local network, and not configure port forwarding, you can actually change this to your ATEM's IP address. Again, go to the ATEM Setup app to find it. Mine's 10.11.45.218. And if I do this and set it to the local address of the ATEM and load this into any cameras or other gear on my network, then it'll actually stream just within the network and never go over the internet, and you won't need port forwarding. And that's all I wanted to share with you today. 3 different ways to stream into the ATEM Television Studio HD8 ISO. Thanks again to Blackmagic for loaning me this to take a look at and play around with and share with you. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.